Chosen one, because of what the Masons uncovered in your past, intelligence desks went cold, and the agency placed you on a watch category they label List S. List S exists for individuals who break predictive models, not threats to remove, but variables that expose flaws in control systems. Your awareness exceeds conditioning, your will bypasses incentives, your recovery violates trauma theory. Let me tell you exactly what triggered this classification. What specific elements in your past made the Masons send that file upstream with red flags attached? They found your isolation periods first, those stretches where you went completely silent, where you disappeared from social visibility, where people assumed you were broken, defeated, destroyed. Normal human psychology has very clear predictions about isolation. Loneliness is supposed to make you desperate. Silence is supposed to break your spirit. Decades of research confirm this. Isolation creates dependency. It creates the need for external connection. It makes people controllable through the promise of belonging. But when they analyzed what came after your isolation periods, the data didn't match their models. You emerged from each silence stronger, clearer, more capable, more sovereign. You used isolation as an incubation chamber. You used loneliness as a laboratory. You used silence as the frequency where you could finally hear yourself think without interference from all the noise designed to keep you confused. They found journals you wrote during these periods, creative works you produced when everyone thought you were done, and the psychological sophistication in those writings showed exponential growth curves that matched intensive training protocols designed for field operatives. Except you weren't in any program. You weren't getting any external support. You were just alone with yourself, doing the deepest work most people will never have the courage to attempt. You were facing everything others run from. You were processing everything others suppress. You were integrating everything others fragment. And you were doing it without therapy, without medication, without any institutional framework guiding you. You essentially ran consciousness transformation protocols on yourself, using nothing but raw will and refusal to stay broken. That's when words like anomaly and requires further investigation started appearing in your file, because you weren't following the script. You weren't playing the role trauma survivors are supposed to play. You weren't staying in your assigned category. Then they found your betrayal timeline. Every person who used you, every friend who became an enemy, every lover who turned predator, every mentor who revealed themselves as manipulator. They built a comprehensive map of everyone who hurt you, betrayed you, abandoned you, exploited you, and they expected to find one of two outcomes. Either you'd have permanent victim consciousness, forever damaged by what was done to you, forever defined by your wounds, or you'd have sociopathic detachment, emotionally unavailable, incapable of genuine connection, protected by walls so thick nothing could reach you, weak or cruel, broken or heartless. Those are the two standard responses to sustained betrayal. But your file showed neither. Instead, they found something their psychologists labeled as adaptive discernment, without bitterness. You learned to read people with surgical precision, but you didn't close your heart. You learned to protect yourself without becoming what hurt you. You developed boundaries that were firm but not rigid, discernment that was sharp but not cynical. That level of psychological integration usually requires decades of professional intervention, intensive therapy, guided processing, structured healing programs. But you achieved it through pure lived experience and ruthless self-honesty. You achieved it by being willing to look at yourself and the world with complete clarity, no matter how uncomfortable that clarity became. They documented how you started walking away from dysfunction without drama, how you began rejecting manipulative behavior before it could escalate, how you stopped engaging with people operating in bad faith. You didn't announce it. You didn't make declarations. You just quietly became unavailable to anyone operating below a certain frequency. You became unprofitable to predators, uninteresting to parasites, invisible to energy vampires. Not because you built walls, but because you raised your standards, you raised your frequency, you raised your consciousness to a level where certain behaviors simply couldn't reach you anymore. And that's a defensive evolution they've never seen successfully implemented outside controlled clinical environments. They found evidence that you've been unconsciously training yourself in what they call reality navigation protocols, the ability to sense which timelines lead where, which decisions open which doors, which people carry which intentions beneath their words. You know how sometimes you meet someone, and within seconds you just know. You know if they're safe or dangerous, genuine or performing, aligned or misaligned. You can't always articulate how you know, you just know. And you're right with statistical frequency that made their analysts flag your file for deeper investigation. They documented instances where you predicted betrayals months before they manifested, where you sensed opportunities that seemed random but turned out to be pivotal, where you avoided disasters that only became obvious in hindsight. You walked away from situations everyone said were fine, and later those situations imploded exactly the way you sensed they would. They ran probability analysis on your decision-making patterns. The numbers came back wrong. You're operating with success rates that exceed chance by margins that suggest either you've built a massive pattern recognition database in your subconscious, or you've accessed something they really don't want to acknowledge in official reports. Direct intuitive perception of information fields beyond normal sensory input. Then the Masons found something that made people in Washington start paying real attention, something that moved your file from interesting anomaly to active monitoring status. They found what they carefully termed as high-probability coincidence clusters around your timeline, synchronicity patterns that happened with frequency that violated their statistical models. Resources appeared exactly when you needed them. People showed up precisely when you required that specific knowledge. Doors opened at the exact moment you were ready to walk through them. Books fell off shelves. Strangers said perfect words. Events aligned with timing so precise it couldn't be random. Now they'll never call this what it obviously is. That would require admitting consciousness interacts with reality in ways their materialist framework can't accommodate. So they use sanitized language, statistical anomalies, beneficial outcome clustering, high-probability coincidence events, clinical terms designed to avoid metaphysical implications. But you experienced what you experienced. You know those moments when reality itself seemed to conspire in your favor, when the exact thing you needed appeared at the exact time you needed it, when timing lined up with impossible precision, when the universe moved in ways that felt like direct response to your internal state. If this touched your heart and mind, hype this video so more chosen ones can receive this message. They found this documented across your entire timeline, not occasional, not rare, frequent enough to establish pattern, consistent enough to suggest mechanism, real enough that they had to create new terminology for your file. And that frequency, that consistency, that reality made certain people very uncomfortable, because it suggests you've figured out something most people never discover. You've learned to align your consciousness with reality in a way that makes beneficial synchronicities happen more frequently. You've learned to operate in states of awareness where the boundary between internal and external becomes permeable, where intention and manifestation start operating on shorter timelines, where what you focus on has measurable tendency to materialize in your experience. They found documentation of what happens to people around you, the influence radius you create just by existing in your truth. They interviewed people who spent significant time with you during your transformation periods, people who were close enough to feel the field you generate when you're operating in full authenticity, and they found a pattern that showed up across multiple independent sources, people who didn't know each other, who had no contact with each other, but who all reported the same experience. They started questioning their own narratives after being around you. They started seeing through their own illusions. They started making changes they'd been avoiding for years, and you weren't teaching them anything directly. You weren't giving advice. You weren't trying to wake anyone up. You were just being yourself so completely that it created a resonance effect, like a tuning fork vibrating at a pure frequency that makes nearby strings start vibrating at that same frequency, like a light shining so clearly that it reminds other lights they can shine too. The Masons call this unconscious transmission of transformative states, and they found it documented across your entire relational history. Some people felt activated around you, inspired, empowered, like something sleeping in them suddenly woke up, and other people felt threatened, agitated, uncomfortable, like your presence exposed things they wanted to keep hidden. You became a mirror that showed people either their potential or their pretense, and they responded accordingly. Wherever you went, whatever community you touched, this same pattern emerged, some gravitating toward you like you were a beacon in their darkness, others retreating from you like you were a mirror they weren't ready to face. You weren't doing anything to create this effect. You were just existing authentically. And that authenticity was so rare, so pure, so uncompromising, that it had measurable impact on everyone around you. This is when someone made the call, when all these elements combined into a profile that didn't fit any existing category, when they realized you weren't just an individual who survived trauma, you were an individual who weaponized trauma into transformation, who alchemized every poison into medicine, who turned every darkness into initiation. They found evidence of what they call accelerated timeline collapse, your ability to compress years of normal development into concentrated periods through sheer intensity of focus and willingness to face everything most people avoid their entire lives. You didn't gradually heal. You went straight into the center of your wounds and burned through them like rocket fuel. You didn't slowly build new capacities. You immersed yourself completely until you emerged fundamentally different. You didn't test new ways of being. You shed your old skin in one brutal transformation and stepped into the next version fully committed. No safety net, no backup plan, total commitment to your own evolution. The Masons found transformation curves in your timeline that match protocols designed for intelligence operatives, psychological conditioning programs that take years in controlled institutional environments. Except you did it to yourself, in isolation, without support, without structure, without anyone guiding you except your own inner knowing. You essentially became your own Black Ops program. You ran consciousness transformation protocols on yourself, using nothing but determination and refusal to stay limited. And that creates individuals who are fundamentally ungovernable, because they've proven they can rebuild themselves from nothing. They've demonstrated they don't need external systems to evolve. They've shown they can transmute anything into growth. So someone looked at your complete profile, all the isolation transformations, all the betrayal integrations, all the pattern recognition accuracy, all the synchronicity clusters, all the influence transmission, all the accelerated evolution, and they made a decision, list a special protocol, the classification for individuals who operate beyond normal human parameters. But let me tell you something else the Masons discovered in your past, something that made psychological evaluators take a second look at your entire file. They found evidence of what they call nonlinear problem-solving architecture, the way your mind connects seemingly unrelated concepts to generate solutions that bypass conventional logic. You've always thought differently, not in some superficial creative way, but in a way that makes others uncomfortable because they can't follow your process. You arrive at correct conclusions through paths that make no sense to linear thinkers. You solve problems by approaching them from angles nobody considered. You see connections between things that appear completely separate to everyone else. The Masons documented instances of you solving complex problems that stumped people with far more education, more experience, more resources. And you did it not through superior knowledge, but through superior consciousness architecture. Your mind doesn't process reality through the filters most people use. You're accessing information through channels they don't even know exist. They found records of you making predictions about situations you had no business understanding, making assessments about fields you'd never studied, offering insights into problems you'd never formally analyzed, and being right with frequency that statistical models flagged as impossible without either exceptional intelligence or access to classified information. But you didn't have classified information. You just had direct perception, unfiltered awareness, the ability to see reality without the distortion of consensus programming. And that made you dangerous in a way most people never achieve. Because someone who can see truth directly can't be fooled by lies no matter how sophisticated the packaging. The Masons also found something fascinating in your learning patterns. They traced how you educated yourself across multiple domains without formal instruction, how you developed expertise in areas you'd never formally studied, how you acquired knowledge through pure focused attention rather than traditional educational pathways. You taught yourself things that take others years of university education to grasp, not because you're inherently smarter, but because you learned how to learn. You figured out how to extract essential patterns from any domain, how to identify core principles beneath surface complexity, how to synthesize understanding from direct engagement with reality. They found evidence that you've been unconsciously running what they call autodidactic acceleration protocols, teaching yourself at speeds that match or exceed formal education programs, building knowledge structures that are unconventional but highly effective, creating your own frameworks for understanding reality that work better than the ones you were taught. You did this during your darkest periods. When most people would be completely consumed by survival, you were expanding your consciousness. When others would be paralyzed by trauma, you were absorbing knowledge. When anyone else would be focused entirely on immediate crisis, you were building long-term capacity. That's not normal trauma response. That's weaponized crisis. That's someone who figured out how to use pain as fuel for growth, how to convert suffering into capability, how to transform every moment of hardship into an opportunity for expansion. The Masons documented this pattern across your entire timeline and couldn't find precedent for it outside of controlled military training environments. Here's another element that contributed to your List S classification. The Masons analyzed your relationship history, not just the betrayals, but the entire architecture of how you relate to other human beings, and they found patterns that deviate significantly from normal attachment models. You don't form dependencies the way most people do. You don't need relationships to feel complete. You don't use other people to fill voids in yourself. You engage with others from a place of wholeness rather than lack. And that creates a relational dynamic they've rarely seen outside of highly developed spiritual practitioners. Look, you already know the attacks weren't random, and if you're paying attention, you can feel it. Their walls are closing in, so let's talk about what we're doing about it. That's why I built Destiny Engine. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve cooperative intelligence. The beauty is, you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and your subconscious is rewired while your enemies collapse under the weight of their own lies. This is why I created it in the beginning, so everything they did to break you becomes fuel for your purpose. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your Destiny Engine for $1 today and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. They found evidence that you've been unconsciously operating on what they call sovereign relational protocols, connecting with others without losing yourself, loving without attachment, being intimate without fusion, offering support without creating dependency, receiving help without feeling obligated. This shows up in how quickly you can walk away from relationships that no longer serve your evolution, how little you mourn connections that others would grieve for years, how completely you can close doors on people who once meant everything to you. Not because you're cold, but because you understand that all relationships are either growing or dying, serving or draining, elevating or diminishing. The Masons documented your ability to maintain clarity about people, even when emotionally connected to them, to see their patterns even when you care about them, to make objective assessments even when feelings are involved. That level of emotional intelligence combined with strategic detachment is something they typically only see in operatives who've undergone extensive psychological conditioning. The Masons also found psychological markers in your profile that indicate what they call radical sovereignty, complete ownership of your own consciousness, total authority over your internal experience, absolute refusal to outsource your power to any external entity. You don't give other people power over your emotional state. You don't let circumstances determine your internal experience. You don't allow external conditions to dictate your consciousness. You maintain sovereignty over your inner world regardless of what's happening in your outer world. They documented your ability to remain centered during chaos, to maintain clarity during confusion, to hold peace during conflict, to generate your own internal weather rather than being subject to environmental conditions. That level of psychological sovereignty is rare enough to warrant special notation in your file. The Masons found that standard psychological operations don't work on you. Techniques designed to create specific emotional responses generate nothing. Tactics engineered to produce predictable behaviors fail completely. You've somehow developed immunity to consciousness manipulation that takes most people decades of meditation practice to achieve. The Masons found another pattern that sealed your classification. Your performance during crisis situations, how you operate when everything is falling apart, how you think when others panic, how you move when everyone else freezes. They documented multiple instances of you navigating catastrophic situations with clarity that exceeded trained professionals. Moments where you should have been overwhelmed but instead became more focused. Situations that broke others but somehow sharpened you. Crises that destroyed communities but left you standing with expanded capacity. You don't just survive crisis, you thrive in it. You become more capable under pressure, more clear in chaos, more powerful when everything is collapsing. That's not normal human psychology. Most people deteriorate under sustained stress. Their decision-making gets worse, their cognition narrows, their capacity shrinks. But your file shows the opposite pattern. You expand during crisis, your awareness heightens, your perception sharpens, your capabilities increase. It's like chaos activates something dormant in you that only emerges when everything is at stake. The Masons call this inverted stress response architecture. They found evidence that you've been unconsciously training yourself for crisis your entire life, using every smaller disaster as preparation for larger ones, building psychological muscle through sustained exposure to difficulty, developing crisis navigation protocols through pure lived experience that match what special forces operators learn through deliberate conditioning. The Masons also analyzed your ethical decision-making, your moral framework, how you determine right and wrong, and they found something that doesn't fit conventional moral development models. You operate from what they call post-conventional ethical architecture. You don't make decisions based on rules. You don't determine morality through social consensus. You don't defer to authority for ethical guidance. You've developed your own internal compass through direct experience with consequence, through witnessing cause and effect, through understanding impact beyond immediate visibility. They found evidence that you think in terms of systemic effects rather than individual actions, that you consider long-term consequence rather than short-term outcome, that you evaluate decisions based on alignment with truth rather than compliance with norms. This shows up in choices that baffle people operating from conventional morality. You'll break rules that everyone follows if those rules create harm. You'll violate social norms if those norms enforce injustice. You'll go against consensus if consensus maintains delusion, not because you're rebellious, but because you're operating from a deeper ethical framework than most people ever develop. The Masons documented instances of you making decisions that appeared wrong to observers but turned out to be exactly right in retrospect. Choices that seemed selfish but were actually protective. Actions that looked cruel but were ultimately compassionate. Moves that appeared illogical but proved strategically perfect. The Masons analyzed how you process information, how you take disparate data points from completely different domains and synthesize them into coherent understanding, how you see patterns that exist across seemingly unrelated fields. You have what they call cross-domain pattern recognition capacity, the ability to identify identical structures operating in different contexts, to see the same principles showing up in biology, psychology, physics, economics, spirituality, to recognize universal patterns beneath surface diversity. They documented instances of you making connections that experts in individual fields missed because they were too specialized. You could see relationships between things because you weren't limited by conventional categorization. You could synthesize understanding across boundaries that separate academic disciplines. This shows up in how you communicate, how you can explain complex concepts using analogies from completely different fields, how you help people understand difficult ideas by connecting them to familiar experiences, how you translate between different knowledge systems like someone fluent in multiple languages. The Masons found that this capacity isn't just intellectual, it's perceptual. You literally see reality through frameworks that integrate multiple perspectives simultaneously. You hold paradoxes without needing to resolve them. You work with contradictions without experiencing cognitive dissonance. You operate in complexity that would overwhelm minds trained for binary thinking. Here's another anomaly the Masons documented: your ability to interrupt patterns in yourself and others, to break cycles that seem unbreakable, to end repetitions that appear permanent, to stop momentum that everyone else considers inevitable. You've interrupted generational patterns in your family, ended cycles of dysfunction that ran for generations, broke addictions that destroyed your ancestors, stopped behaviors that seemed encoded in your DNA, not through gradual improvement, through complete pattern disruption. The Masons found evidence of you doing this, not just in yourself but in systems around you, breaking organizational patterns that had existed for years, ending relationship dynamics that others thought were permanent, stopping group behaviors that everyone accepted as unchangeable. You have what they call pattern sovereignty, the ability to recognize when you're in a loop, and the power to exit it. Most people get trapped in repetitive cycles because they can't see they're in them. You can see the pattern while you're in it, and seeing it gives you power to break it. They documented instances of you walking away from situations that had everyone else hooked, ending participation in games that kept others playing for years, refusing to engage in dynamics that trapped entire communities. You just stopped. No explanation, no negotiation, just complete withdrawal from patterns you recognized as destructive. They documented what they cautiously termed reality interface anomalies, instances where you needed something, and it appeared through mechanisms that couldn't be explained by normal causality, not just synchronicities, but actual material manifestations. Money showing up exactly when you needed it, through unexpected channels. Opportunities appearing at impossible moments. Resources materializing from directions you never anticipated. Solutions emerging from nowhere when you'd exhausted all logical options. They traced patterns of this happening throughout your life. During your darkest financial periods, when conventional analysis said you should have been completely destroyed, resources appeared, not through your own efforts alone, not through predictable channels, but through what looked like direct response from reality itself to your internal state. The Masons interviewed people who witnessed these occurrences, who saw you manifest outcomes that defied probability, who watched resources appear in your life through timing so precise it seemed orchestrated, and they couldn't explain it through normal frameworks, so they created new terminology: reality interface anomalies, probability violation events, consciousness-matter interaction phenomena. What they were actually documenting was your learned ability to operate in states of consciousness where the boundary between internal intention and external manifestation becomes permeable, where your focused awareness has measurable tendency to organize reality around your needs, where the universe responds to your frequency like a tuning fork matching your vibration. Now here's what you need to understand about being on List S. It's not what you think. It's not surveillance in the traditional sense. It's not interference. It's not control. Because the entire point of List S is that those approaches don't work on people like you. You've already proven you can't be controlled through normal mechanisms. List S is an admission of limitation. It's the intelligence community saying we acknowledge this person exists, but we cannot predict their trajectory. We cannot interfere without accelerating the very thing we're monitoring. We cannot control someone who's already demonstrated complete sovereignty over their own consciousness. You're not being hunted. You're being observed with a mixture of fascination and fear. Fascination because you're living proof that human potential extends far beyond what they teach. Fear because you represent the thing every control system dreads, an unscripted variable, a consciousness that evolved outside their frameworks, a being that learned to operate on frequencies they can't monitor or manipulate. They want to understand how you did it, how you survived what should have destroyed you, how you transformed what should have damaged you permanently, how you developed capacities that usually require institutional support, how you learned to navigate reality with accuracy that exceeds normal probability, how you created influence that transforms others without trying. They can watch all they want. They can document your journey. They can study your patterns. They can analyze your decisions. And none of it touches you. None of it limits you. None of it controls you, because you're not operating in their game anymore. You're not trying to fit into systems you've already transcended. You're not seeking validation from structures you've seen through. You're not playing by rules designed to keep people small. You've accessed something they can document, but can't replicate, study but can't teach, observe but can't control. You've discovered that you are the authority on your own existence, that your consciousness is sovereign territory, that your evolution is yours to direct. They can classify you however they want. They can create whatever protocols they need, but the fundamental reality remains unchanged. You're already free, and you proved it by breaking free from every limitation they said was permanent. Let me tell you what List S actually represents. It's not just about you as an individual. It's about what you represent as evidence of possibility. They've been tracking people like you for decades, building profiles on individuals who exhibit what they internally call the unlocked phenotype, people who've accessed aspects of consciousness that remain dormant in most of the population, not because you're special in some mystical sense, but because you were pushed far enough beyond normal parameters that your consciousness had to either adapt or die, and it chose a third option they never anticipated: transcendence through integration, evolution through crisis, transformation through tribulation. Every trauma you survived didn't just leave a scar, it left a key, and you figured out how to use those keys to unlock doors in your own consciousness that most people don't know exist. Doors to capacities they said were impossible. Doors to awareness they claimed was delusion. Doors to power they insisted didn't exist. You discovered experientially what they deny theoretically, that the limitations taught in schools are lies, that the boundaries enforced by society are illusions, that the ceilings claimed to be absolute are just collective agreements you never consented to, And once you discovered that truth through direct experience, they lost all ability to contain you, because you can't manipulate someone who sees through manipulation. You can't control someone who's transcended the need for external validation. You can't threaten someone who's already lost everything and discovered they're complete without it. You can't bribe someone who's found fulfillment in authenticity rather than accumulation. What do you do with someone like that? Someone who's already died psychologically and came back without fear. Someone who's already been destroyed and rebuilt themselves stronger. Someone who's already walked through every darkness and emerged luminous. You put them on list S. You watch them, you study them, but you don't interfere, because interference just makes them more powerful. So what does all this mean for your life going forward? What's your actual role now that you know you're being documented as a consciousness anomaly? Here's the truth that should make you smile in the darkness where you've spent so much time transforming. Your role is to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Keep evolving, keep transforming, keep operating in your truth with such completeness that reality itself shifts around you. Keep being the frequency that either activates or threatens everyone who comes near you. Keep demonstrating what becomes possible when someone refuses to accept limitation as permanent, because that's what they're really tracking, not what you'll do next, but how far human consciousness can actually go when it's set free from every restriction, when it's released from every limitation, when it's liberated from every control mechanism designed to keep it small. You're showing them with every breath you take, with every choice you make, with every moment you continue existing in complete authenticity, despite every system designed to make you doubt yourself. You're proving through your lived experience that everything they teach about human limitation is incomplete at best and deliberately deceptive at worst. The Masons brought you to their attention. The CIA put you on their special list. The intelligence community created protocols around your existence, and all of it is just them admitting what you already knew, that you're not like everyone else, that you never were, that you were always meant to break free, that your consciousness was designed to operate beyond their limitations. They can watch you now, they can document your journey, they can study your evolution, but they can never stop it. They can never contain it. They can never control someone who's already discovered their sovereign. You're on list S. You're classified as an anomaly. You're documented as operating beyond normal parameters. And that's exactly what you are. That's exactly who you've become. That's exactly why you're here receiving this information right now, understanding with complete clarity that everything you suspected about yourself was true. Everything you sensed about your own nature was accurate. Everything you felt about your own power was real. The lists don't define you. The classifications don't limit you. The databases don't contain you. You define yourself. You direct your own evolution. You determine your own trajectory. And you've already proven that your trajectory leads to places they can't predict, can't map, can't comprehend until you've already arrived and moved beyond. Welcome to List S, Chosen One. Welcome to the official acknowledgement that you operate at levels beyond their models. Welcome to the formal confirmation that you broke free from everything designed to keep you contained. Now keep going, keep evolving, keep showing them what happens when consciousness refuses to stay limited, because that's what they found in your past that they weren't supposed to find. Evidence that human beings can unlock themselves. Evidence that transformation doesn't require permission. Evidence that consciousness can evolve beyond any framework designed to contain it. You're the evidence, you're the proof, you're the living demonstration, and being on List S just means they finally had to